evening, everybody. Welcome to another night of See and Learn. We are here at Liam's Cuisine. How is the appetizer? Yes, thank you. Just a reminder that the appetizers are sponsored by the Nature and Environmental Policy Plan, courtesy of the NET program and the ministry in the Netherlands. And tonight, we would like to get started by thanking some of our sponsors, particularly Carib Trans and Satel. They are the reason that we are able to live stream this presentation. So welcome to all of our viewers tuning in online as well. We also like to thank public entity SEBA and CCG, which was formerly Prince Bernhard Culture Funds. They have been sponsoring our program for the last 15 to 20 years, so thank you to them. And a big thank you to all of our sponsors. We have over 60 now. Many of them are here tonight, including Joe Bean. You can make glass beads with her like our expert did. Yes, thank you, Joe Bean. We have Michael from Iris House somewhere in the audience. We have Larry and Sherry who have Flamboyant Cottage. We'd also like to give a big round of applause for SEBA and the SEBA Conservation Foundation for helping us with all of our marine and some of our terrestrial field projects this year. So thank you to SEBA and SCF. And we'd like to give a big shout out to Althea's Cottage, who is hosting tonight's speaker, Kimberly. So thank you, Althea's. And we do have a raffle going on. The final night is Sunday. So buy your tickets. They're only $5 a piece. Or if you buy in bulk, you get a discount. And we have lots of great prizes. We have trips to St. Croix, St. Martin, Statia, as well as a trip to SEBA, and it includes accommodation, diving, hiking, airfare, and or the Makana Ferry. So lots of great prizes. Also, a week on a liveaboard. So buy your tickets. And upcoming events, we only have 2 more events because we're at the end of the month. Tomorrow, Kimberly will be leading a snorkel to find some turtles, as well as learning about turtle health. This is fully booked. We have about 25 people going out tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up, unfortunately, you can't join this time, but it's going to be really great. Kimberly's going to talk more tonight. And then final night, as we mentioned, is this Sunday at Shea Booba with our shark expert, Erwin Winter, who is right here in the front row. Give a wave. So that's going to be a great presentation that you will not want to miss. And if you join, well, I guess there's only one more field project. But if you haven't picked up your field project t-shirt, they're great. They're pale mint. They're super soft. And they're made from recycled plastic. Tonight, we have another turtly amazing presentation by Dr. Kimberly Stewart. Kimberly is the Executive Director of the Wider Caribbean Sea Turtle Conservation Network, or WIDECAST. The founder and director of the St. Kitts Sea Turtle Monitoring Network, and an associate professor of exotic and avian medicine at Ross University School of Veterinary Medicine in St. Kitts. She is a biology graduate of Georgia Southern University and a DVM and PhD graduate of RUSVM. A native of Statesboro, Georgia, Georgia is where she was met and introduced to sea turtles, first as an intern with the St. Catharines Island Sea Turtle Program, and then with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources on Sapelo Island. When she moved to St. Kitts to attend veterinary school, she recognized the need for the development of a formal sea turtle program, and this led to the establishment of the SKSTMN in January 2003. Since that time, under Dr. Stewart's leadership, SKSTMN has since grown to include, that's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. I'm so sorry. The Turtle Project.
Both morning and night patrols for all species nesting on the island, in-water capture of foraging juveniles, a sea turtle health assessment program, sustainable livelihood development, and a conservation and sea turtle health education program. So please welcome Kimberly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, Emily, and I apologize for the long title. As I told her earlier, if I'd known we would have been around this long, I would have shortened it extensively. Well, good evening. Thank you very much to the See and Learn Foundation for having me here tonight. I'm very excited to share a little bit about what I do. Tonight I'm going to focus on methods for identifying individual sea turtles. Some of you guys are probably already aware of them. And then we have some new methods that we're beginning to use in several countries throughout the wider Caribbean that I wanted to bring up today. And then we'll just discuss some projects that I have ongoing with Sea Turtle Health and St. Kitts to let you guys kind of know what we're doing next door. Am I in the right spot? Okay. So there we go. So I know I have a very well-versed audience tonight in sea turtles, but I did want to touch on this in case anyone did not know. We have 7 species of sea turtles in the world. Within the wider Caribbean region, we have 6 of these. So we are going to have the leatherback, green, loggerhead, hawksbill, olive ridley, and Kemp's ridley. In our specific area here, we're likely to be seeing the green sea turtles and the hawksbills within the nearshore waters, both our juvenile age classes as well as our subadults and adults. Leatherbacks are a bit more pelagic, so we're only going to be seeing those when they're coming into nest in this region. And then our loggerheads, we've seen 3 of those in St. Kitts since the 1960s, so they're not super prevalent, but 2 of those ended up as my patients, so we'll touch on those later. So it's important that we always briefly touch on the fact that all of these species are endangered at some level. So for those of you familiar with the IUCN Red List, which I'm sure most of you are, sea turtles are going to fall within these critically endangered to endangered and vulnerable classifications. So for critically endangered, that means they've lost about 80% or more of their population over the past 3 generations, which is about 100 years for sea turtles. And then for our endangered status, that's going to be about 50% of the population lost. So when we're thinking about hawksbills, those are critically endangered, and our greens are endangered. And the life cycle for sea turtles is fascinating and very complicated. So I do like to point that out in the beginning when we get started. So we know we have our females coming into nest. They will lay these nests, which sit and incubate for about 60 days. Then once these hatchlings emerge, they're going to enter into an oceanic phase. So along the east coast, they're headed off into the Sargasso area, so they can float in these sargassum mats where they can camouflage, they can feed, get bigger and grow, and then they're going to recruit back to our nearshore waters when they're about dish plate size, maybe 4 years or so. So that's where you're going to be seeing those juveniles of about 25 to 30 centimeters in carapace length. Then they're going to continue growing, and our subadults will begin migrating back into the areas from which they hatched and emerged themselves. That's where their mating will take place offshore, and then we're going to have these females coming back into their natal beaches to nest as adults. We know for hawksbills and greens, which is what I'll really focus on talking about tonight, they don't do this until they're about 40 years of age. Which is pretty impressive, right? And only about 1 in 1,000 or less make it back to reach that adult stage to come and nest. So I want to run through the species really quickly. So I'm going to test you guys. What do I have here? You know these, hawksbill, absolutely. So this is probably one of the most common ones we have in this area. One of the important things to mention as well, we still do have a harvest for within about 30% of our countries in this area. So this is one of the species that is still harvested in some islands next door. So thus contributing to that critically endangered status that they have. They are distributed worldwide. These animals reach about 200 pounds as adults. We're typically going to be seeing those juveniles to subadults in this area. We do have significant nesting next door, Nevis, St. Kitts. Antigua is a large nesting area for hawksbill sea turtles. They can navigate rockier coastlines, and they really like to nest in areas that are covered by beach vegetation. So if you have manchineel trees and sea grapes and things like that, they're going right up in and under. They're very difficult to take blood from when they're nesting at night because you're crawling into the bushes and like, what is happening in here? But it's fun. It's challenging. So they will nest every 2 to 5 years, and during that reproductive season, they're coming in about every 2 weeks to lay a new nest, and they'll lay about 150 eggs or so. Their diet is almost entirely sea sponges and some components of reef invertebrates. So they basically have a diet of glass, which is pretty cool. When I'm necropsing, I don't like that though, because those glass spicules are throughout the GI tract, so you have to be super careful that you don't get cut. And as I said, they are listed as critically endangered. And I wanted to put this picture in. This was a workshop we had at our YCAS annual general meeting this year in Costa Rica in March. And Didier Chacon, the leader, our country coordinator for Costa Rica, was doing an illegal trade workshop. So we had all of the different hawksbill products, some plastic, some shell, some that look like hawksbill carapace that are actually made from horn and things of that nature, and we were learning how to tell the difference because it is important. We do still have a shell trade in some areas, and so we have to be familiar with how to do that. So we have over 40 countries within the YCAS network, and about 44 country coordinators, so we were all in learning about this. And we will also be having another one in March, I believe, at the YCAS meeting this year, so if anyone's interested in popping over. And then we have the next species that we commonly see here, which is green. I feel like this morning with the classes with the children. So these are absolutely beautiful. They lack those overlapping scutes like shingles on a roof, which we see with the hawksbill sea turtles, which is an identifying feature. We know they have these two prefrontal scales between their eyes and that more rounded head. So these are distributed worldwide as well, reach to about 500 pounds as adults. I found it very interesting when I was reading up on the history of them within the Caribbean when I first moved here over 2 decades ago, that these were the species that oftentimes their shells were used as cradles for babies because they're so big. So that was one of the uses that back in the day they were used for. They nest every 2 to 5 years with internesting intervals of about 12 to 15 days during a nesting cycle, about 2 to 5 nests per season. We have seen increased nesting in the region with these animals within the past few years, which is good to see happening. That's a positive increase. I was thinking about during your presentation with the algae on the reef, I was wondering if we're seeing more juveniles and feeding on some of that as well, because we are seeing more juveniles in the area as well. And these are listed as IUCN Red List status endangered. And then I had to put this one in, although we don't see them very frequently. So who do we have here? Loggerheads, absolutely. So when we're looking at them and their prefrontal scales, we can see they have this little one in the middle here that kind of breaks up everything. These animals are really cool. They can have over 80 species of epibiota living on their carapace because they're meandering so slowly along the reef, feeding on their various invertebrates, crabs, shrimp, mollusks, jellyfish. These animals are incredibly expensive in rehab because I have to feed them lobster here. Oh my goodness, we will talk about that later. And then they make friends with the lobster and they don't eat them, and you're even more challenged. So you're gonna find most of their nesting along the southeast Atlantic coast in the United States, so Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, etc. Although we do see some starting to enter the waters now. So if we're getting some of these images, we're talking about photo ID and things like that, it's gonna be really cool to start identifying these individuals. These are listed as threatened. And then finally, I'm gonna put this one in here because this is one of the species I worked with most frequently. This is the leatherback sea turtle. These do reach over 2,000 pounds as adult males, which is incredible. Our females in St. Kitts are anywhere from about 600 to 1,500 pounds. So they look like little Volkswagen bugs coming at the beach at night. And when they breathe, it's like Darth Vader's come to see you. They're very cool. Because they're so large, they prefer these isolated beaches adjacent to deep water for nesting. They don't like to drag over the reefs, so you're going to find them on the Atlantic side, typically of St. Kitts, where I'm at, with these highly dynamic beaches where we have a lot of erosion. So if we're not moving their nests and intervening, we're losing a lot of them to erosion. They mate and nest about every 2 to 5 years. This is historically what we have known about them, but I've got some new information I'd like to share as we move through this. And their internesting intervals during one reproductive season are about every 10 to 12 days. They feed almost entirely on jellyfish as adults, which is pretty incredible that they reach this size consuming those. And interestingly, when I started working with these animals around 2002, they were listed as critically endangered. And then in 2013, they were downlisted to vulnerable because they felt that the Atlantic subpopulations were stabilizing. However, as a region, we came together and we've realized we've had a massive decline over the past 10 years in the Northwest Atlantic population. So in 2018-19, these were uplisted again to endangered. So just emphasizing the importance of this population monitoring, marking individuals, keeping track of them. And I'd just like to break them out a little bit. We always say the hard shells versus the soft shell. So we know leatherbacks don't really have a super soft shell, but it is softer than the other 6 species of sea turtles. And that's because we have these two families, Dermoculiidae, which is the only one within that is the leatherback, and Cheiloniidae, which is going to have all of our other species. So when they hatch, they have these individual ribs, but we're going to get ossification along the margins of those, and they're going to fuse. So you can see the ventral view here of these ribs. So they fuse to form that bony carapace here, versus those leatherbacks, which just have cartilage with little bony plates within their carapace, and that's because they dive over 3,000 feet, so they need to be flexible under pressure. So we also have different ways of attaching transmitters and tagging them and things like that. So why do we want to mark sea turtles as individuals? It's a good question. Do we just want to harass them and we're, overstepping boundaries here? No, there is a significant need. We can monitor population trends, looking at movement patterns. Some of our leatherbacks that nest in St. Kitts go all the way up to Nova Scotia to feed and come back to us 5 years later. So being able to see where these animals are moving in between different regions, because we know in some places they're protected, some places they aren't, some places they're encountering longlining and things like that. So helping us to see trends and where we might need to make changes in legislation. It helps us to monitor things like individual growth rates, reproductive life history, one that I love, monitoring individual and population health, and then strandings, so having these animals marked as individuals and what's happened to them. So some of the methods we use for marking these as individuals: flipper tagging, passive integrative transponder tagging or PIT tagging, and photo identification. So I'm going to briefly go through those really quickly. How many of you guys have used these before or seen them used? Ever? Okay, cool. So we are flipper tagging most of our sea turtles throughout the Caribbean. And so with these, we have these cattle ear tags basically that go into the applicator. Of course, we're cleaning thoroughly before replacing these with betadine and alcohol. And we're placing these on the turtles, so they're going to have a specific number on one side, and then they have an address on the opposite side for your returns, which we'll talk about in a second. We do have a marine turtle tagging manual for recommended practices. We are currently updating that one with some new techniques that will be out hopefully in the next year or so, but this is readily available by PDF if you're interested. And this is just showing you that clamping, so it's basically like getting your ears pierced. I've got some over there if you guys want to tag each other. I'm just kidding. Afterwards, you can check them out. So when we're thinking about these hard shells, we're putting them in the front flippers along this trailing edge, and we're usually going in the second scale, and that's because it's not going to rub on the body there, but then it's also not far enough out to get pulled out or for them to reach around and bite it, because turtles can get annoyed and be obnoxious from time to time, and they will do that. And so this is kind of showing you here that placement. We're going in the middle of the scale, and we're leaving about a pencil's edge width between the trailing edge of that flipper and the tags, so that if we have any inflammation or anything like that, it's not going to abscess or have any issues, and also with growth. For our leatherbacks, who always have to be different with everything, we place those tags between the tail and the rear flipper in what we call the baggy pants region right here. And we're placing them on both sides, so they're going bilaterally on these animals. And for them, their flippers are enormous. They look like German Shepherd puppies to me. There's like these long limbs they don't know what to do with. And we know that they're diving over 3,000 feet, so the retention in the front is not that great, so that's why we put those in the rear. And so, how does all this work? We're tagging these turtles. The Wide-Cast Marine Turtle Tagging Center is located in Barbados, and so if you are interested in starting a tagging program, you make an application for tags to the Marine Turtle Tagging Center. The applicant must be trained and have a Wide-Cast training certificate or have been trained by a Wide-Cast country coordinator so that they're comfortable knowing that you are skilled with this. And then you will receive tags and applicators as requested and applied for. And then you submit back an annual tag fate report every year in exchange for that. So I tagged this turtle, basic information, what beach, what species, etc. So it's a centralized database. So if I find a turtle in St. Kitts I don't recognize, I can read that tag number, contact Dr. Horrocks in Barbados, and she can tell me the first time it was tagged, where it was tagged, everything that's happened with that turtle, which is pretty cool. So this is just showing you here, too, if you find a tag, you'll have that number and you'll have the return address for Barbados. This is helpful. We have a lot of fishers in the region that might interact with sea turtles and have these tags to return, so they know who to contact. And we do also have a lot of different posters and messaging and things like that, so people are aware. So this is just showing you two nicely placed tags on this hawksbill. and then one of the challenges we run into with these tags. So retention can be a challenge sometimes. You can see we have a tag scar right here. So this little dude lost, or girl, I don't know. I haven't checked blood levels of testosterone on that one. So we've lost it. So this means we may recount it again accidentally, or someone else might do it. So we need some backup method, right? So that we're not overestimating our populations and retagging. So then we're going to move into pit tagging. So how many of you guys have your animals microchipped? All right, so it's the same thing, right? So we have this tiny little rice grain size tag within the needle. I have it over there too. Please don't tag yourselves with those. We might get some bleeding from that one. So it's injected into the skin or muscle, and it's encapsulated then into fibrous tissue, and it typically doesn't migrate extensively in sea turtles. Of course, we're disinfecting this area completely with betadine and alcohol before we place it, because we are inducing a puncture wound of sorts, and we don't want to cause infection, so we're very, very careful. So we're placing these in conjunction with flipper tags. You're not going to see these used everywhere, and that's because there's a pretty large cost associated with it, because the scanner is about $500 US and the tags are about $7 US a piece. So that's one reason you're seeing flipper tags used more frequently. And this is just kind of showing you how we're injecting them. So I'm going in sub-Q away from the neck, because I'm always afraid they'll flinch and I'll hit the jugular, which I know is probably not going to happen. But and then for leatherbacks, they're huge, right? Their musculature in the shoulders is so thick. We're not going subcutaneously. We're just going directly into the muscle for them. And we're putting them on the right side, typically, so it's standardized. However, if we have some sort of a wound there, we may pop over to the left side. All right. So those are two methods we've been using for a very long time. And photo identification is a relatively new one, meaning like a decade or so, that we've begun using for sea turtles. And this is a non-invasive way, also a way to get citizen science projects going, because you can invite people to submit their photos and upload them into this software program. And so you're able to identify these animals as individuals without having to capture them and haul them in. So in places where they're protected and you can't have tagging programs and hands-on, you can use the imagery. And also for populations, like we were asked to do an assessment of the subadult populations of hawksbills and greens in St. Kitts, but I cannot jump in the water and catch a 250-pound subadult and bring it in safely for that. So photo identification is a way that we can gather that data. Also, one of the cool things that it allows for is monitoring of tumor progression. So I'm sure some of you have seen these tumors that turtles get, the fibropapilloma. Sometimes they will progress to a point the animal will die or need surgery, etc. And sometimes they will regress. So it allows you to kind of monitor these animals in place for a while. So just to briefly go through this, turtles have a unique pattern of facial scutes, and they're asymmetrical between the left and the right. So these are showing you the ones that are used within the photo identification software to ID these animals as individuals. So you, if you're out snorkeling, you're out diving, you have your camera with you, you're capturing these images, we ask that you get one of the right and one of the left. Also the carapace. If you're noticing any abnormalities, that's great too. We also want to make sure we're respecting the turtle's distance, right? So we're not going to go in and intrude upon their space. But getting these images is helpful, because then we can upload them into the program and it will match and figure out which individual we're working with. So this is just showing you those scale patterns again. And this is showing you use, Joanna Hancock has done some work in Kenya with this, specifically looking at tumor regression and progression with these sea turtles. So this is stage 1, which you can see then a year later is progressing. And then a year after that, you can see this animal severely affected. And so FP, that looks really bad. However, if it's not gone internally to the kidneys or liver yet, we can remove those surgically and release the animal. If it's gone internally, they do have to be euthanized because we don't have a treatment. So it helps you kind of monitor what's happening there. You may choose to intervene or not at that point. And then this is showing you regression, reminding us that we don't always need to jump in all the time, because this is an animal we can see here. They usually start around the lids, progression, and then it's regressing there. So it's a cool way to mark them. This is another study from Brazil. If any of you guys are interested in any of these papers, I have them. But just giving you some imagery here where you can see this lesion has regressed. And I know within the past 4 or 5 years, I think I've had 5 or 6 FP cases in St. Kitts, and prior to that I had none. And we are starting to see it around other islands throughout the region, so this is something that's kind of starting to move in. It's highly contagious between them. We have to be careful if you're working with an FP turtle that you're not then touching a non-FP and using the same equipment, etc. So this is concerning. And then you can see with this animal, they oftentimes get them around the eyes. They'll develop large tumors in the prescapular area around the cloaca. They're moving really slow. They just become debilitated. So this is a pretty severe case here, but you can see this is regressing, which is pretty cool.
So regressing because
It's mounting an immune response to it, and it's regressing. Yeah. So we will see that, but not always. I had one come in that looked similar to this, and we went with removing them all and then getting it back out. But with photo ID, we can start monitoring them a bit more and watching in place what's happening. And I threw this in. This picture's terrible. This is a midnight call to the sea turtle hotline in St. Kitts from the pier that they hooked a turtle. But you can see the hook is the least of the turtle's worries because this is a large FP tumor right here. And I took this one, which isn't showing, because this is a great view of the carapace and why we would use it. She has very abnormal scutes. She has about 6 or 7 along the vertebral column instead of the normal 5. So she's pretty easy to ID. But we did remove this tumor and we released her. Photo ID is a great way to try to keep monitoring her. We know these juveniles move all around here, so if you're getting images here, but we're not, etc., we would be able to track and see if this has come back again and things of that nature. So how can you get involved? If you're out diving and snorkeling and this is of interest to you and you have equipment where you're taking photos, we would invite you to take one clear image of the left side of the head, one of the right. Specific location information is important, but it doesn't have to be GPS. It can just be the bay or the beach that's nearest. Date and time of sighting, your name, and if you have any other images, you can upload those as well. And these are just giving you an idea of images that were clear enough to match. So you can see the top is too blurry to be useful. So if you had one like that, we would not be able to utilize it. And then these were clear enough to be matched. And then you can get them from different angles and still have matches here. So this is helping you appreciate that it doesn't have to be directly, side on. You can get them from other angles and it will still match. So you have these images, you upload them in Hotspotter or APHIS, whichever program you're working with, and it does the matching for you. So what we did, we got a small grant from the French Embassy last year to develop short courses on a lot of different things that we needed for sea turtles. And one of them was photo ID. So if you're interested or if you want to further develop one, I can pass along how to do this for SEBA. It's a short course, takes about 15 minutes. It takes you through the different species, the sites you would be going to, photographing sea turtles in the wild, how to do that, supplementary materials, a little quiz. Once you're done, you get a certificate. And within that, we have embedded the link, and this isn't going to work right now, but I'll have it tomorrow when we go out. I can't pull it up, but this can be done from your phone or your computer. So you click the link, you pull it up, you're going to put your name, date, time seen, location for the turtle. You can take a GPS coordinate within the program. You just pop a button. It throws up the coordinates. You enter the species and your images, hit send, and you're done. You don't even have to be near Wi-Fi. Once you get back to it, it will upload. So it's a pretty straightforward, simple process. Any questions on that? All right. Yes?
Can I see the title one more time?
Yes. See the which one? Sorry.
Is this in the App Store? Or
It's not in the App Store.
how do you get it?
You can go within the course here, and then you'll get the link. So I can send that to you. I didn't put my email address up here, but I'm sure you guys can get my contact information out, and I'll absolutely share it. Sorry about that. But within the course, if you go into it, the link is embedded, and then you can just save it on your phone and go into it. We were using Kobo Toolbox, but we're migrating over to Earth Ranger right now, which will be the primary use for it. So then I just wanted to take you through, hopefully I haven't talked too long already, through some of the specific projects we have as far as why we identify as individuals and things we're figuring out, right? So, population demographics and health parameters of juvenile hawksbill and green sea turtles in St. Kitts. So when I moved there, we really had no idea how many juveniles we had, or subadults or adults, but we still had consumption happening. So there was a real need here to figure out how many turtles we had, and then moving forward to that, we have access to them, so let's start to look at health and things of that nature. So we work with these juveniles in about 15 bays around St. Kitts, and we capture them via snorkel. They come in, we do our measurements, our straight carapace length, our curved carapace lengths and widths. We take weights. They are pit tagged, and all of these various things I've talked to you about before. So this is just showing you flipper tags. And then we do take blood samples for everybody. So I think I've banked back blood from 2004 onward for every juvenile in Hawksbill that's captured in St. Kitts and Nevis. So it's a great bank just to be able to go back to if you want to look at something in more detail later as well. So one of the reasons we were doing this, when we go to the doctor, they have all the reference intervals for us. They say, oh, your renal function's off or whatever. We don't have that for all exotic species, so it's important we establish it. So we had to get 120 to really have nice reference values set. So we've done that, and now we can move on to looking at other disease processes and things like that. And this is also, with ours, we're starting to see, this is an early case of FP right here that you notice. So we do document lesions and things like that and keep track of those animals. So it can be very small in the beginning. And just, you've marked up of individuals. Now you can start looking at sizes, comparing between species. We do see that the hawksbills we're seeing recruiting back to the near shores are smaller than the greens that are coming in at the same time in weight and measurements. And then starting to compare some of these blood values that we're seeing between species after we've set the reference intervals. I won't bore you with all of that, but one of the interesting things for me is that we're seeing higher white blood cell counts, heterophils, and monocytes in our greens versus our hawksbills. And we know we'll see elevated white blood cell counts with chronic antigenic stimulation, so we may have a viral bacterial issue going on. And so are we seeing that these animals maybe are carriers of FP and we're not seeing a clinical manifestation of it? Also with the monocytosis, with some of them, you're starting to think about that. So these are different things you can start comparing as you're going through. And then I'm sure you guys know this, but sea turtles have temperature-dependent sex determination, right? So the temperature at which they incubate determines if they're male or female. So I just think of it simply as hot chicks and cool dudes. This is how we teach it at camp, and that's how I think about it. But when we start thinking about global warming, this is a serious issue, right? Females are going to take over the world at some point with sea turtles. We're losing genetic diversity and everything else with this. So we can access these hatchlings on the beach, put temperature transmitters in, determine what temperatures they were incubating at. We'll know that these peripheral areas are going to be cooler than the center and the top. So figuring out male and female ratios is a bit more straightforward with them. With our adults, we know that we can tell by tail length. As we know our males, once they reach that 40-year age mark for greens and hawksbills, will have these extremely long tails versus our females, which will have the shorter ones. But when we're thinking about juveniles, we can't look at them and tell. So taking a blood sample and looking at plasma testosterone levels is one way that we can do that. And in some populations throughout the Caribbean, we found 9-to-1 ratio female to male, which is a bit disturbing, right? So I wanted to take a look at our animals in St. Kitts and Nevis. And also I'll say for our hatchlings in St. Kitts, all of our leatherbacks that we've necropsied have been female. We have not had a single male, which is interesting. But for the breakdown for what we saw with our juveniles, I think we had about 80 in this sample size here. And we were comparing to different locations throughout the region in the Dominican Republic, Mona Island, USVI, Florida, for our hawksbills, because we know in Puerto Rico, Carlos Diaz has done a lot of the groundbreaking work on this. But what we were finding is our range is about 2.4-to-1 female to male for our hawksbill sea turtles. And then when we look at our greens in St. Kitts and Nevis, it's about 1.5-to-1. So we're not as skewed as some of those other populations, and we're very similar to what they're seeing in the DR, Puerto Rico, USVI. I won't bore you with this slide. This is the values. I don't think anybody really cares too much about that. But so looking at the levels, it's been interesting because there weren't necessarily a lot of reference intervals set before. There's very few projects that do it. But we have tweaked the method. We can do it next door in St. Kitts if you guys are ever interested and have access to that type of sampling and want to look at it. And then for leatherback sea turtles, marking these as individuals and looking at population and health assessments of them has been a very cool ride. But with this decline in the populations, we've gone from having over 400 nests a year down to 18 last year, I think. So it's been a lot more challenging for access to these animals, but knowing it's important. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about our leatherback project. So we do patrol these beaches for 7 months of the year. The two main nesting beaches we have for them here are North Friars and Keys Beach. If any of you guys have visited, I'm sure you've seen this iconic image here in North Friars. So we typically work the beaches every night from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. So every time a turtle's encountered, that animal gets worked up. It's the vampire shift, right? I've gotten a thermal drone this year, so I'm not going to have to walk as much. I can look for the turtle instead of having to walk everywhere. But when she's up, she's basically getting a full health assessment. So you have a lot going on here. Blood's being taken from her. We're getting measurements. If the eggs need to be relocated, those are going to be relocated. We've gone through and set these baseline parameters for these animals, but when we went in to do that, we know you might get a different value depending on what site you're drawing blood from. So as a first-year PhD student, they said, well, you need to compare the dorsal cervical sinus and the rear flipper in every single individual turtle that comes up and determine which is better. So I was running up and down the beach, going between both, and I found that there was no significant difference if we drew from the head, as you saw us doing in the hard shells, versus the rear flipper. But for me, there's much less disturbance when I'm going in the rear flipper, and so that would be where I would recommend in the interdigital vein. They're also tagged. So when we're just thinking about this, a neophyte's a previously untagged turtle, remigrant previously tagged. A new remigrant is one of these turtles that we've had visit us, but it was tagged somewhere else before. So we've had turtles come over from Grenada. I think they just like to get health assessments and then pop back to Grenada sometimes. And St. Croix and other places, and ours have gone to Colombia and other places like that. And through the Widecast Tagging Center, we're able to know where they're going. I also get into a little bit of lesion analysis. So I'll say location where I had the lesion. So this is a front flipper. The type of lesion that we're seeing, we have a notch here. This is a partial amputation, but that didn't come out very clear. Sometimes we'll get full amputations in the rear, and you have to weave and bob and dig for them to help them a little bit. I've had a female come in with a degloving injury where she was just digging with bones, which was, but they troop through it, right? And then I mark through whether it's acute or if it's a proliferative lesion or if it's a remodeling, kind of basically a scar. So we're documenting all of those. Shark bite up here on that rear flipper, but not too severe. We see a lot of linear lesions where that's probably just related to coming over and interacting with the reef. Documenting whether they have a mild, moderate, severe barnacle load. We know leatherbacks are pretty mild because they're swimming so quickly, but getting that. If we have a nest that needs to be relocated, we're back there catching those eggs and moving them. We're also placing temperature probes at the bottom, in the middle, top, and on the side. And so those will take temperature every 5 minutes for 70 days, and we can track what's happening in there, because one of the things we found is an incredibly low hatch success where we're at. And we've seen they're incubating at like 110 degrees Fahrenheit and above, which kind of explains why nothing's emerging. But we do those. And then we excavate once they hatch, and we look at the number of hatched versus unhatched. And we will open up those unhatched eggs, and we'll see what type of lesions they may have had. So we'll do necropsies and look at their health. And so now when you've marked this individual female, you now have the health of her nest. You can start correlating back to seeing if she's having an effect on what you're seeing within these embryos and things of that nature. So it gets really cool. And a few of them we've placed critter cams on, because when we started seeing this decline, we wanted to see if they were interacting with longline fishing offshore and things of that nature. I got really excited, thought I was going to find out all this stuff. I'll show you footage in a second of what I actually got. And just to throw in here, most of my physical exams are on the top part because I can't lift this 1,000-pound animal, and I thought you might enjoy this, especially if you're tired of hearing me talk. But see, it's a little dangerous back here in the back. But she had a really cool lesion on that right rear flipper that I was trying to document. So just some results here for you guys. This got skewed, but this is number of nests, and this is what we're seeing over the past, I don't know, this makes me feel old, 20 years, 21. So this year, I think we had 18 or 20 nests. So this is, just emphasizing the long-term importance of population monitoring, marking these animals as individuals, seeing what's happening with them. Interestingly enough, we started seeing these dips right around the time we got that vulnerable status put in, saying that they were stabilizing. So within individual countries, we weren't seeing that, and through the Widecast network, we're obviously talking, and that's one way that we were able to work together to get that change. Something else interesting, I've only thrown up between 2006 to 2016, but one of the things we're seeing is we'd always known leatherbacks nest every 2 to 5 years, right? With our females, when we started, it was every 2 years, then it's every 5 to 7. Some of them I haven't seen in 11 years. So are they traveling a lot further, foraging for food, and getting up to a healthy state where they can actually nest? We don't know what's going on there, but it's obviously for further investigation, and it's pretty interesting. One of the things we've also noted in St. Kitts, for leatherbacks, hatch success is typically about 50% as a species. We're finding that ours overall is 18.7. On Keys, it's 6.4, and on North Friars, it's 31%. So we have incredibly low hatch success, which set us off on a whole nother thing. Some of those lesions, most commonly in those front flippers, which is not surprising. Where am I going here? Lesion type frequency, we're typically seeing a lot of those notches, followed by those linear lesions. Stage of healing, most of these barnacle loads were mild, and we had most of these injuries in the remodeling or basically scarring phase. When we were looking at hematological parameters, we didn't see a lot of difference between other populations that have been studied, like Gabon and Florida, with the exception of an increase in white blood cell counts for these animals. I'm not sure. That's for further looking at that as well. And then we were pretty spot on with our hematological, our biochemical parameters, with only a lower CK, which measures muscle enzyme activity, and AST, which can also be a measure of muscle or liver. So I don't know, maybe our girls aren't exerting themselves as much. Maybe I'm quicker with my needle and I'm not damaging muscle. I don't know. I like to tell myself that. But those are the only differences we saw, so nothing significant. And then it gets really interesting, because if you're marking these individuals and you're sampling them each time they're coming up, then you can start looking at evolution of parameters over a nesting season, right? So one of the things we were noticing is, say for the first sample, white blood cell count, pretty low, pretty normal. And then as we move through the season, we're getting an increase, right? And then also we're seeing an increase in monocytes. Not highly unexpected. She's getting more injuries. Her immune system is probably more compromised. She's had more inflammation and things like that. But something to note, because also, not that this is a highly elevated monocyte count, but monocytosis is also correlated to low hatch success in sea turtles. So is maybe this having some sort of an effect with our animals, because we saw it. And then looking at our evolution of our biochemical parameters, we're seeing decreases in total solids, glucose, total protein, and albumin. Not unsurprising, seen in other populations, they're not feeding really very much during these internesting intervals. They're continually laying eggs, so we're going to see decreases in these values. And then this is my critter cam footage. I just thought you'd like to see it. Oh, I thought I was going to see all this cool stuff and solve the problems, and really I just saw her breathing a lot with her fish friends. I think we tagged a good number of them, and I watched hours and hours and hours of footage. And we still have one missing out in the Caribbean somewhere, but my cell phone's written on the side of the camera, so hopefully I'll get a call one day if someone finds it. Yeah, those are cool because they track for about 10 or 12 hours after they leave the nesting beach. So if they're encountering something in the near shore area, you'll see it. And so then this is just emphasizing we'd seen that decrease. We talked together as a region. We knew we had these declines, and this is just helping appreciate the declines we were seeing between 1990 to 2017 and then 2008 to 2017. We have these huge data sets because we have, all of these countries working together and submitting them for analysis. So we did see these regional level trends of a severe decline in our leatherback nesting populations. And so then that's when these animals were uplisted again to endangered within our Northwest Atlantic region. Any questions on that part? I'm almost done. I'm just going to throw in 2 patients here, and you don't have to hear me anymore. Have I gone too long? Yes.
Did you find?
Oh, I'm supposed to repeat the question, right? Okay.
Did you find? Did you find any difference in hatch rate between first nesting and last nesting?
We did not. And this is something I wanted to look into further, but with the massive decline we've had in nesting overall, I'm very limited on sample size. We've worked also in Grenada with their team and also in St. Croix, kind of conducting the same sort of study. No significant difference there. They do have higher hatch successes than we do. I think St. Croix is at about 30% overall. We did find some males there, but I have those papers too if you're interested at all in seeing those. And then these are also out publications through Widecast if you guys are interested at all on our Northwest Atlantic leatherback population. And we do have a regional action plan with action points and items that we're beginning to work on, hopefully, to reach recovery for these populations. And then I wanted to throw in a few important reasons why we mark these turtles as individuals on our live stranding and response side of things. We do some sea turtle rehabilitation. We are still currently at a very elementary phase where we do dump and fill, so it's a lot of work when we bring them in, but we did recently get a hospital building built, so hopefully we will be able to be the first one within the Caribbean where turtles can come in. So if you have an injured turtle, you'd be able to send it over. So this is a loggerhead that we had strand on Nevis, which, if any of you guys are familiar with the area, it's like 2.5 miles between the channel. So I get the call from the fisheries officer, Kimberly, I got this, and I get this picture. Do you want it? I'm like, of course I do. It's a loggerhead. That's only the second one since the 1960s. And you can see she was completely wrapped in line and fishing net here. So we had to ask the water taxi if they would be kind enough to let her ride with all the guests coming over in the afternoon. So this animal rode over on the water taxi, and we brought it in and did a physical exam. This is pretty dark, so we can't significantly see what's going on there. But this is the left front flipper, which had significant line entanglement. And then we have the left rear flipper, which you guys can appreciate here. This was pretty severe. So then I'm looking at this animal and I'm thinking, oh, obviously you want to treat and save it, but you have to think, can I get it back out into the wild again or not? And if it's going to be missing both flippers on one side, that's highly unlikely. Then you think, can I place it in an aquarium? Very limited. So we went and moved into blood work. Nothing significant there, but I wanted to show you the radiographs. This line had been wrapped around and so tightly for so long, you can see that it's gone completely through that humerus there. And then we looked at the rear, and you can see the damage here as well. So the bone still looks healthy, so we thought, we have some pretty amazing surgeons next door. We thought, let's see, give it a few days, see if the tissue's still healthy. Maybe we can try to pin this or fix it. So we gave it a couple of days, and the tissue just kept devitalizing. We had to make the decision to go in to remove it. And you can appreciate the animal's pretty thin, too, in the next picture. But this is Dr. Kavanaugh coming in to amputate this one. And you can see the end result here. And this animal's pretty concave. You can even see the entoplastron, which is a bone that's actually pretty cool because it's shaped differently for each species of sea turtle. But it's so thin you can see these. So he or she had not been feeding for a while. So this is the closure on the rear. So we were hoping we would still have functionality of this one so that we would have the potential for release. So prior to removing that flipper, this animal would not eat, was not interested in anything. Within less than 24 hours, let's see if this is gonna go. There's lobster, right? They eat better than I do. So totally good with this. Back on good diet, we have sea turtle vitamins and things like that they're getting, so we're getting that weight back on. And so this was a few months out, completely healed. Everything looks good in the front, and this is that rear. Incredible job by Ryan. And it took us about a year with this turtle, actually. And we did get some funding for a transmitter, which is what you can see here when we released him. And I just wanted to show briefly how well they can do with 3 flippers. Slowly crawling out. And this is also, to me, why it's so important. I love to monitor and have them marked as individuals. Now I can see where he went. Obviously, the transmitter worked for about a year and quit, but we do have the flipper tag, the pit tag, and the photo imagery. So even if he loses those, we'll be able to ID. Give it a second till he takes one breath. And I did run plasma testosterone. This was a boy. So indeed a boy. And just to show you, it left White House Bay in St. Kitts, and it ended up off the coast of Cape Verde, like right by Africa. So those 3 flippers did not hinder that turtle whatsoever. And I really hope we'll see it coming back into this area at some point, and maybe with these photo ID projects and things like that, we can do it. And this is my last patient that I wanted to show you guys. This was our 3rd loggerhead since the 1960s. She was found floating offshore, and the fisher called and asked if he should bring her in. And so we said yes, brought it into our main cruise ship port, and dropped her off. This is what she looked like when we started the exam in water, because we know we have to do a hands-off in water first. So you can appreciate this lesion here. Even has barnacles growing within it. So this was likely a boat strike and a really old one she'd been living with for a while. So you can see here the significant damage to the carapace. So this was surgically debrided. All of these bone fragments were then removed. And this is what we ended up here with. You can appreciate how nice this looks. Healthy tissue underneath. So this animal was with us also for about a year, and then we released her. She was a very interesting character. Her name was Sassy for a reason. She oftentimes would shoot water out of her nose at me and nail me right in the face. And when we put this transmitter on, you have a lot of factors there. You're putting epoxy on. It can get really hot, so you don't want to burn them. And when we put it on her, we put her back in. I've never seen a reaction like that. She got very nervous, almost like when you put a harness on a cat. She was very angry with me. And I thought, what have I done? I was running all these extra diagnostics. And she refused to swim for almost a week for me. But I would sneak in at night and look at her and see her swimming around the tank. So she was pouting. So we had an entire caravan set up where she left the hospital. People were meeting us along the way. We weren't taking any time because we wanted to get her to the ocean as fast as we could, so that she would not be further upset with us. But you can see once we put her in the water, she was upset again. So it took us a little while. I want to see if I can fast forward to this a little bit further. That's Angie, my technician, in the water with her. She was trying to entice her to bite something so she would forget that she was upset with us and just take off. And it took a little while, so I won't pain you with all of that. She's finally getting the key here. But then what's funny to me is once she took off, she did not stop. It took her 4 weeks to get to Florida. So she's out of there. And so this was her last location. We had that operating for about a year on her. So these are cool. The transmitter's not working anymore, but all of those different tagging methods that we have, hopefully we'll have a sighting of her again, either when she comes into nest. I did run plasma testosterone. This one was a female. We'll see her again, or either through photo ID and things of that nature. And so that was all I had for you guys. And I just wanted to thank and acknowledge the various agencies involved. Ask if you have any questions. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a great presentation.
Awesome.
I was wondering, are you thinking about intervening with the temperature by placing shadings above nests?
We have been thinking about that. We need to at this point because we had no hatchlings this season. So that is something we will likely be starting to do next year. We'd also looked at the potential for a hatchery and moving them to a more suitable location. I don't like to get into a lot of interference with leatherbacks, though, because what I've found is when we relocate, even if it's absolutely necessary, that's really the only time I do it, I'm seeing no hatchlings coming out either. But we likely will start with some of the shading and misting next year. Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could place those eggs maybe in an incubator or something.
I get that question a good bit. The challenge with that is you have 80 to 120 eggs taking up a huge space, and we would have to have a huge facility for it, so it's just not something that's feasible, unfortunately, and definitely not long term.
Great presentation. I really like
Thanks.
Uh, Do you also do genetic studies, for instance, next of kin studies to look at how related they are?
For genetics?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I bank everything back. Like I said, I'm the biggest hoarder of samples. So we just did this with our leatherbacks. We're working with Peter Vetton, and he just sent back those results actually this year, so that should be coming out. And we worked with Darren from the Barbados Sea Turtle Project on our hawksbills. So we are doing that as well. I just don't have anything published yet on it, but yes. Taking samples, and also of anything that strands dead or alive. You know, when I first moved to St. Kitts, within the first 15 years, we may have had 9 strandings. In the past 4, we've had about 40 strandings. So taking samples of those as well, everything is.
And how strong is their homing how strong is their homing to particular beaches, or is there some mixing between adjacent nest sites?
Leatherbacks will go within 60 kilometers of their natal beach, so they will travel a bit. All the other species are very specific. So that's one of the challenges you see with all of this development we have going on and things like that. Turtles come back and it's like, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I mean, we have one now coming in every 2 weeks on our main strip right across the road, you know, trying to go back to what she's used to. So the leatherbacks are a little bit, they'll jump around a little bit more, but not the hard shells. Our leatherbacks, I think St. Croix, Columbia are the 2 main ones that are popping out in my head where we have them. And our population is most closely related to the St. Croix population. And Puerto Rico, too. They like to pop over there.
Do you ever use subcutaneous radio monitoring?
I have not. Well, the pit tag is it. So that's, yeah.
Okay.
And I would love to do more transmitters, but they're very cost prohibitive. I would love to have some on leatherbacks.
What are the predators of the leathernecks?
Of the leatherbacks?
Yeah.
Those you're going to see sharks, primarily. Orcas are as well. Humans are as well, unfortunately. But primarily a shark will be the main one.
That's a soft shell?
It's a softer shell, so it's cartilage with little bony plates within it, so it's not that, you know, hard, complete bony carapace that you have in the others. So I wouldn't say it's soft. You're not going to indent it when you touch it, but it's softer.
And the hard shell ones, what are their predators? Sharks also?
Oh gosh, when they hatch, it's like running the gauntlet, right? Yes. Once you move through the different stages, so the hatchlings, crabs, birds, dogs, mongoose are a big one in St. Kitts. They will go after, especially the hawksbill and green nest, because they're only about this deep versus the leatherbacks, which are a bit deeper. So lots of different predators at that stage.
For adults, the adult turtles, what are their predators? Still sharks? Sharks eat everything?
Yes, those would be the primary for adults. But when you're thinking about hatchlings, juveniles, things like that, even some of our larger pelagic fish can feed on those smaller classes. Birds, pelicans, you know, they consume them as well. I was rehabbing a pelican and a sea turtle in the same room, and I'm like, don't look at it. You're staying on your separate side, and things like that. So we frigate birds. I mean, a lot of the different birds. That's one reason if you ever go to a hatchling release, they're usually at night, right? Because there's less predators that can visualize the hatchlings and get them. And you're usually doing it about an hour and a half to 2 hours after dusk, because you have a lot of those large fish feeding along the shoreline in the earlier hours of the night. So
Food nearby. How large is a leatherneck egg?
a leatherback egg. Oh gosh, I always have these. I'm looking
Like
for
a
one.
tennis ball?
About 2 inches in diameter.
About 2 inches.
And the cool thing with leatherbacks is they lay those yolked eggs that are about 2 inches in diameter, and they'll lay about 80 to 100 of those, and then they lay these tiny yolkless ones on top. And that's when you watch them laying, you know you need to be done with everything, because she's almost done and she's about to throw sand on you. But those, they think, just help to humidify the nest. They serve as a little air pocket there, and then predators are going to hit those first, typically, if they're going in. So they're like spacer eggs that will never actually hatch. And you can pull those and do genetic analysis. We've gotten to a point now where I don't have to see the female anymore. I can take the egg sample, and also even just samples of sand at this point from the cloacal drags, which I'm excited to get into next year. There's just so many things to do and only one of me, which is why she has to take over and start working for me now. Take on some tasks.
You said the same turtle comes back about 2 or 3 times in a couple of weeks to lay more eggs?
Yes, so what you'll get, let's say specifically with leatherbacks, I don't have favorites, but I talk about them a lot. So they will come in for a reproductive season every 2 to 5 years or 7 years. Within that reproductive season, they will come in about every 10 to 12 days for anywhere from 1 up to maybe, I think the most ever documented was 12 nests in one season. What we are seeing with some of these changes and trends is we're not seeing the females coming back again to lay more. We're seeing them do 1 or maybe 2 and then they're gone. So we're not getting the 3, 4, or 5 that we used to get.
How many eggs is being a nest roughly?
For a leatherback, it's about 80 to 120. For your other species, you can get anywhere from 100 to 180, 200 eggs. But they're going to be smaller ping pong size.
I let an eggs 300 eggs roughly in a season. Wow.
It's a lot, yeah. And then you think about they've laid that many and then only 1 in 1,000 of those are each here. The odds are kind of daunting, but that's why we do what we do. Right? Well, go ahead. And I have a whole selection of skulls up here and stuff if you guys want to check them out.
Real ones?
I didn't end up in jail, so we know they're not real on my entry in. They're plastic, but they're replicas.
Is there how do you say, like a bottleneck size, and after that size they're kind of okay and keep crawling?
I would say once they reach that subadult, like 60 centimeter size, they're pretty safe. Juveniles, you know, we don't study them enough. We focus so much on our nesting females that we have super access to that we don't study it enough, in my opinion, in a lot of places on our juveniles, which is one reason I've tried to work on them so hard. So this dish plate size is still pretty susceptible to a lot of different predators, but once they get into our 60 centimeters, they're more protected.
But that takes like 4 years or something?
Oh gosh, for 60 to 70 centimeters, I would say they're reaching about like 25 to 30 years of age. So like your 4-year-olds are about this big.
Okay.
You know, we see some that are 15 years old that are maybe like this big.
So growing them in the lab wouldn't be feasible.
No, unfortunately, no. That's another question we get a lot. And, you know, leatherbacks are very challenging to get to eat. Dr. Jeanette Weineken has a diet that she's successful with, but I know for me, even in rehab, it's very hard to get them to eat. The other species are a bit easier.
So the turtle hatchlings band together for survival, or everybody's on their own from birth?
They just take off, but at least they're emerging all at one time, right? So the odds are there that at least more will make it because you have the 100 hopefully coming out at once.
But when they get out in the sea, they're on their own.
Oh, they're gone.
They're
Mhm.
on their own, no help
Yeah.
from another turtle.
No help. This is just like with the mom, you know, she doesn't come back to check on them. I think every child cries at sea turtle camp the first time they say, "What? The mom doesn't come back? There's no maternal care?" Nope, they're on their own completely.
When you're tagging them or injecting them or whatever, or drawing blood, are they sedated at all, or you just?
No, they're not sedated. When we're working with them, when an animal is nesting, I wouldn't say she's in a trance, but she's so focused on what she's doing. The only time I sample her is when she's laying eggs. So I'm only going to draw blood at that point, and tag. And then once she's done with that, if I haven't gotten what I needed, I'm just done. And it's too bad for me because I want to prevent disturbing them. As far as the juveniles, we don't have them out for more than about 15 minutes. It's a quick in and out, and they're just simply restrained. You could get into placing lidocaine if you wanted to, but those injections are pretty painful. So the flipper tag itself is probably a lot less painful than doing an injection of the lidocaine. If I was doing a biopsy or something like that, I absolutely would have them under some sort of sedation with lidocaine, a topical, or either general anesthesia.
Is it possible to take the hatchlings and take them out to sea for better survival?
You know, they really need to orient themselves to come back again. So they need to make that crawl and they need to make that swim. Otherwise, now you're starting to really mess around too much with their navigation ability and whether they're going to come back to the same place and things like that.
Oh, so it's been tried before?
Many studies have been done on orientation and things like that. And then when I have a animal that I've rehabbed, maybe from a post-hatchling size, I am concerned about that. Are they going to know where to come back to when I'm taking them offshore and releasing them? Because I've taken them out of a nest, taken them in and treated them, and now I'm dropping them back in. But it is important to their process.
First of all, thanks for the presentation. Actually, coming back to this hatchling kind of part, like, is there anything known about the sargassum dynamics right now? They're of course coming way closer into shore, way closer to the islands. Like, if post hatching they actually make it out there, like maybe that increases their survival till they hit those 25, 30 years. But like, that's of course a far fetch. But is there anything known about that?
We don't, but it's something that really needs to be looked into, and I know more people are starting to. Could it increase that survival side, or now they coming back into shore, washing in with it? Because I know we find a lot of hatchlings that come back in with it, or turtles that were stuck in it and couldn't get moving, and they're so thin, they've just been there for a long time. I don't know, it's interesting, and I'm also wondering myself, with all of these strandings that we've been seeing, is there maybe some sort of a toxin related to this that they're consuming, and then they're becoming, you know, kind of flaccid in the water, and then the sharks are more prone to be able to get them? So we have a lot of work to do there with all the different age classes and sargassum. I'm actually saving back stomach contents from everything I need, Cropsy, to see if we can test that in our spare time at some point. So yeah, absolutely.
How long does a leatherneck stay on the water?
How long can a leatherback stay underwater? I don't have an exact number for them, but I think the green was 5 hours was the longest. Yeah. Which makes them really fun to try and put under anesthesia, because they can hold their breath forever and sit there looking at you like, bring it on, because I'm not going to go to sleep right now.
How they sleep on the water, I assume,
They do. So they'll kind of hook themselves in and, you know, hang out and float.
and don't breathe?
And they're just like us, you know, if we're exercising, we have to come up more to breathe, but if they're relaxed, they don't have to as much.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. We will see some of you on the boat tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And if not, you can see us on final night at Shea Booba with Erwin. And if you're interested in purchasing raffle tickets, please see Lynn or me. Thank you, and please support the sponsor by having dinner.